NASCAR Thunder 2004 is considered by most people to be their favorite NASCAR console game, but if you're watching this video then you already know all of the pomp and circumstance surrounding this game. It has one of, if not the best career modes of any NASCAR game, and you haven't proven yourself to be a NASCAR YouTuber if you haven't played through the game on your channel. I have done my fair share of series, including Season Mode as Jeff Green, Career Mode as Martin Truex Jr., and 2 attempts at a 100% race-length Career Mode as Tony Raines. Each of these series had their high and low moments, but there's one thing that's common with all of them. I suck. Now that's not just a blanket statement about how good I am at the game. In fact, I think I'm at the peak of my NASCAR Thunder 2004 talent right now with the Tony Raines series. But there's one thing that I haven't done that I've wanted to do for some time, and that is attempt to win a championship in my rookie season. However, that goes against the entire ethos of the career mode in this game. The point is to start out as some random nobody that suddenly has the worst race cars you've ever seen, and the point of the career mode is to be an uphill grind where the odds are stacked against you at every turn. Are you even trying to assert that this is possible? Yes. And all the evidence you need can be found on Dale Reynolds' channel. Back in 2018, he did a playthrough of career mode on rookie difficulty and absolutely destroyed the competition with 17 wins and easily grabbing the championship. So that's it, right? It can be done? Well, you read the title of this video, so you know what's up. Dale repaired and upgraded his cars as often as he possibly could. It made for a reasonably laid-back playthrough. But what if you weren't allowed to do either of those things? What if you had to play the game from start to finish with the worst possible car you could possibly drive? Can you win a championship in NASCAR Thunder 2004 without upgrading your vehicle? Alright folks, it's time to talk about the rules! As proven by my Truex playthrough, Legend difficulty is not easy. I'm not even going to bother with that or Veteran. Dale played through on Rookie, so that makes it okay. Also proven by my Tony Raines playthrough, long races are not easy. In fact, it's far more reliable to run races as short as possible in order to mitigate the losses you're going to take on the long run from having a garbage car with a garbage pit crew. Short races also means this playthrough won't take 10.5 hours to finish, which is also spectacular. That's why I'm running on rookie difficulty and 5% race lengths, and if you're not happy about that, you can take it up with my legal division. I started my career off using a paint scheme I already had saved on the profile, and named myself after one of the biggest wasted talents in NASCAR of all time, Ryan Hemphill. I numbered the car 188 because I like that number. Then I signed Kmart to almost every possible sponsor slot on the car because I vowed to give Kmart a cup championship. From here I randomly selected crew members because at this point in the game they don't really matter. As you can see, you start off with 2 possible choices for your chassis, engine, and body. And all of those options are total garbage. This 52 rating for the Daytona car is the highest number you will see in this video. This is the first time in my life I've ever looked up NASCAR Thunder 2004 setups. The setups I used were from cheatcodes.com, and I will link this page in the description. You will see for the most part I use these setups as a reference, and on occasion ignore the setups page entirely. For the Daytona 500, I decided to qualify just for the sake of sponsor money. I literally didn't need it because I can't repair or upgrade my cars, but I still did it anyway. I picked up a modest 18th place starting spot, getting the sponsor objective, and skipping the Gatorade duels because they literally don't matter. At the green, I immediately worked to the inside line and tried to start drafting with Bobby Labonte. This went on for some time before I realized all he was doing was holding me up. The car was surprisingly strong in the draft. I wasn't used to this kind of feel in career mode at the start. It ultimately proved to be false hope when 2 laps later I still hadn't caught the 9 cars in front of me. I decided to pit as early as possible, getting on decently but not spectacularly, and took only right side tires. The pit crew delivered with the slowest fueling animation and a 13.5 second 2-tire stop. But this was still enough to get me out ahead of Bill Elliott, so I took the opportunity to LePage onto the clean track for some extra speed. Fun fact, even if a car gets alongside you, you can still crowd them and give them no respect at all, and they will fall back in line like the nice little cucks they are. As more and more cars came off pit road, it was clear I would be the leader, but this wasn't the end of the race. At 2 laps to go, I already had cars 3 wide behind me, and everyone on the track was faster than I was, even all the way up against the wall. I managed to pull Waltrip clear of everyone at the white, which helped into turn 1. Car got tight off too, but I managed to block Harvick on the bottom. Waltrip stopped trying into turn 3 and it may as well have been over from there. Out of turn 4, I coasted to the line to take my first win in the worst possible car I could have been driving. I let the post-race celebrations clean play out in full for some reason. The only person that could be bothered to care about this win was Bobby Labonte, who at 24 points would be the biggest ally I would get at any point in this playthrough. I started off the season first in points with a 5-point lead over Michael Waltrip. It could not have possibly started any better than this. Race 2 of 2003 comes to us from Rockingham.
Otherwise known as the Rock.
Rockingham is a notoriously easy track, both for race and qualifying. I nailed the second lap like nothing, and in only 24 seconds I had finally achieved my lifelong dream of losing the pole to Ryan Newman. On the green, Newman got a ridiculous start and just drove off in front of me. Yeah, that's how this game works, especially on rookie difficulty. I'm not even going to mention how I fire off on restarts because almost every single restart is me getting completely ruined. In any case, it got off to a rough start, but I was quickly able to fire back, and Newman and I took all 4. The game decided I didn't lead that lap. I completely blew turn 3, and Waltrip tried to drive around me. It wasn't enough though, and I held on to the lead just long enough to lose it at the line. This time though, I managed to string together more than one singular good corner, and I finally led a lap in this race on lap 3. At this point, I had a relatively easy job to hold off the field and keep the lead until pit stops. Waltrip finally got around me on lap 7, but he immediately hit the pit lane and I had to lean back. Rockingham is a track where you can make massive gains on pit entry. I promptly made 0 gains on entry and made no changes to the setup. Now would have been a very bad time for the pit crew to have a bad stop. They did. And I lost multiple spots coming off. I had to cut the track as much as possible to get around Craven. Rockingham is a notoriously loose pit exit that I thankfully managed to not eat shit on. From here I rejoined the field outside the top 10 despite pitting from the lead. The pit crew is going to be a major obstacle to overcome during this playthrough. By lap 13 I was already into 5th place with the leader in sight. Fun fact, the drivers get into turn 1 ridiculously early, making it easy to pass them on both the outside and inside. I utilized this to gain 3 spots in one corner on lap 14. Harvick decided he wanted to be annoying though, so I was back to 3rd. It took a long time to get back around Harvick, but it happened on lap 17 thanks to an assist from a rolling chicane named Herbie Sadler. Now all I had to do was catch the leader. It didn't take long to catch Burton, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Coming to the white, I completely blew turn 3, but thankfully Burton fell for it and drifted up the track. At Rockingham you can make the outside work, so I had to run for the lead heading into turn 1. Burton gave up on entry and I was clear for the top spot, but the AI get ridiculous runs off turn 2 at this track, so it wasn't over yet. I tried to catch Burton on the high line by running just off the wall, but he wasn't falling for it. I had to stave off this run, which set me up for a shallow entry to turn 3, and I gave him plenty of room in the corner and was easily in the top spot. The checkered flag was out, and all I had to do was coast to the line, where Burton nosed ahead and I finished in 2nd by 0.001 seconds. It was not an ideal conclusion to the event, especially since Burton leading the last lap gave him 5 bonus points for most laps led, but it was good enough to hang on to the points lead by 25 over Harvick. It was this race that I noticed the game had randomly selected the worst equipment for the Rockingham race, and I still had a fresh new car ready for Las Vegas. This wasn't by design, because the random selection screen is supposed to pick the best equipment you have by default, and yet it didn't for some reason. At least Kmart was happy with me. You may be wondering, but Kamikaze, you can't upgrade your car, so why are you getting this shop edition? Well, that's because it was now time to deal with my useless pit crew. You see, the pit crew you can hire is not just based off your finishing results. In order to get a new pit crew member, you need to... This is awful sentence structure. In order to get new pit crew members to hire, you must first purchase shop editions. Just because I have a shop edition doesn't mean that my equipment is going to automatically get better, because you have to actually select the build, repair, or overhaul option in order to actually make changes to your equipment. You can purchase all the shop editions without actually upgrading your car once. so I decided it was fair to purchase these additions for the sake of unlocking better pit crew members. God knows I was going to need a better pit crew. Fun fact, it's impossible to get this level of friendship points displayed on this loading screen. Ally points are gained in twos, aka 2 points for a clean pass, or 2, 4, 6, or 8 points in share draft depending on your distance to the car ahead. Then for rival points, those are tiered at 10, 30, and 60 depending on how hard you run into someone on the track. These scales mean that it's impossible to get an odd number of ally or rival points. Therefore, this screen cap is either not actually from the game, or there was a different ally and rival point scale early on in Thunder 2004's development. Maybe this means that the ally and rival system was actually good at one point. Or, God help us all, maybe it was even worse back then. Anyway, Race 3 of 2003 comes to us from Las Vegas. Las Vegas is a notoriously difficult track, and I think the reason for that is because the default setup is just that awful. I basically had no pace in qualifying, but that would change during the actual race. On the green, I started 28th next to Casey Mears. Fun fact, Las Vegas was Casey's best track before both the Car of Tomorrow and the Repave. After his cataclysmically awful rookie season, he got his first career top 10 at this track in 2004. After the green flag dropped, I was 22nd after the first lap and 13th after the second. It seemed as though I'd have no issues moving up to the front until the car decided it was done trying and completely gave up into turn 1. Ryan Newman finished the job and the first caution flag of the playthrough came out. No one else hit me and I took the caution in 37th. This was about the biggest disaster that could have possibly taken place. Now the field was going to be strung out single file and I was basically dead last. The only hope I had was to pit the car. I went up on PSI and reluctantly put Wedge back into the car to mitigate the looseness. The pit crew was already having a slow stop before the tire changer decided to make it even slower. With absolutely no pressure whatsoever, the pit crew delivered a pathetic 21.8 second stop. Yeah, like I said before, we need those shop additions to come through so I can hire some people with functioning frontal lobes. If you can believe it, I was the only one who pit. On the restart, I began clawing my way back up through the field. Before I knew it, people were hitting pit road on lap 5, and I was hoping in the back of my mind I would be able to finish the race without pitting again. This would not come to pass. By the time lap 8 hit, the car was already giving up into turn 1 once again, and I didn't even have the lead yet. That time by, the leader came in, and I had my first lap led of the race. I did not want to pit again, but the car wasn't going to make it to the end like this, so I took the walk of shame down pit road on lap 10. I didn't even want to take 2 tires due to the uselessness of the pit crew, but I took rights and had a 12-second stop. This put me back on the track all the way back in 21st place. This is where I would sit, and I hit the wall off turn 4 trying to get around all of Evernham and finish the race in 19th. It would be Tony Stewart taking the win, which was good news at the time, but would eventually become a detriment. Ryan Newman was mad that he ran into me, but no one else really cared. I got all my sponsor objectives and Harvick finished 8th. This left me second in points, 6 behind the leader Harvick. My 7.3 average finish was no match for Harvick's ridiculous 4.7. I was, however, the laps led leader on the season thus far. At this point, all of my parts were at 50-50, so from here on out, I was bringing the worst possible equipment that I could have in the entire game to every race. We were in for the long haul. Race 4 of 2003 comes to us from Atlanta. This is the setup that I used, and I actually got a pretty decent starting spot. I lost a bunch of spots on the start, and apparently this was my fault. From here, the car came alive, and I was making up spots. This was a 10, Kenseth blocked me off the track, and I was in the top 10 by lap 5. The runs that I'm having might make this seem like a really easy playthrough, but if you think that, then you haven't played an EA NASCAR game. Despite my having a solid top 10 run, the people I race against in points always qualify up front in basically every single race, meaning they're picking up laps led in just about every event. Meanwhile, I'm struggling to even make it past the 10th place. If I finish 6th, but Harvick finishes 5th, he's still gaining points on me, and it's a wasted event. I finally made another pass on lap 7 due to people pitting, and I came down on lap 8 without running into anything. I made no setup changes and lost 3 spots off pit road. The track was clear to LePage, and I fought Stewart on the outside for multiple laps, refusing to give an inch. Into turn 1 on lap 10 I gave an inch, and when the pit cycle concluded, I was running 6th. Gordon was too fast and drove off, but I eventually caught Marlin for 5th. Kurt Busch was slow on the outside, which held up both Marlin and Gordon, and suddenly I was 3rd. Not for long though, as Gordon continued to do what he does best, which is be annoying. I did get the 3rd spot after a while though, but that was all I could muster as I came off turn 4 on the final lap to finish in 3rd. Dale Jr. was the winner, and the first 4 races of 2003 had been won by 4 different drivers. This was the first race of this year that I led no laps in. This meant I would leave Atlanta 1 singular point behind Harvick in the standings. Race 5 of 2003 comes to us from Darlington. The setup I used was trash and put me into 37th to start. Spoiler alert, you're going to get used to seeing this front row. After the green, I managed to barely avoid the big checkup and rocketed into 23rd. By the end of the first lap, I had gone from 39th to 19th. By the next lap, I was already 13th. The car was really good. This would change on lap 3, when Rockingham winner Jeff Burton slightly tapped the wall in turn 4. You see, in NASCAR Thunder 2004 on Legend difficulty, random spinners like this are extremely rare. However, on rookie difficulty, it's actually quite common. When a caution like this comes out, it's not actually because the car is wrecking, it's because technically something has broken on the car which causes them to slow down a ton, and that car will always restart the race in dead last. At this point, I thought it might be a good idea to get a jump on the field by pitting here for fresh tires and fuel. The pit crew gave me their best stop of the season with absolutely nothing on the line, and I was the only car to pit on this caution. Fun fact. The reason there's so many checkups at Darlington is because the AI doesn't like to drive off the racing surface, and the racing surface at Darlington is the smallest for an oval in the entire game, meaning the AI catches onto each other a lot and it's very difficult for them to pass each other on the track, meaning they will get held up much more often. On the restart, I quickly realized my mistake. Since the field was single file, there weren't enough cars side by side to get huge checkups, and I was stuck deep in the field. I was making risky moves to make passes, and this was a 60 and this was a 10. By lap 8, everyone had to pit, and I was by myself in the lead once again. There was no chance I'd be able to make it to the end on fuel though, so I pit the car on lap 10. Darlington has one of the longest and slowest pit roads in the game, so I was in for the long haul. I took 2 tires once again and would rejoin the field all the way back in 16th. It was a total disaster considering the fact that I'd been 11th when the caution had come out. Now I was on a tire disadvantage too. I managed to survive to a 12th place finish, but the damage had already been done. Jeff Gordon won the race, and the playthrough had been irreversibly cursed. Jeff Green was extremely mad I had allowed this to happen, and I left Darlington 3rd in points. But there was still a beacon of hope shining in the dense darkness. My first shop upgrade had come through, meaning I could finally begin to hire a pit crew worth a shit. Race 6 of 2003 comes to us from Bristol. This is a track I've never been good at qualifying at, but that wasn't the biggest problem at hand this week. The race went green and the suffering began. I was actually making solid time at the beginning, following the guy in front of me as the outside line worked as a conveyor belt. Things were going swimmingly until lap 4, where I had the nerve to try to pass someone off a corner. This of course left me spinning and sitting backwards on the track. The cutscene patiently waited until I was already last to come up, and I had no other options but to pit the car from last. My pit crew investments were already paying off, and I came back onto the track, still in last. And now the entire field was strung out. It was basically the worst possible case scenario, but I still had one singular ace up my sleeve. Fun fact, Ward Burton has 5 career NASCAR Cup Series wins. On lap 7, I had my eyes set on my man. Ward Burton was driving an alternative paint scheme this week and was running horribly. The perfect recipe for success. If you're unaware, Bristol is a completely broken track in NASCAR Thunder 2004, where 9 times out of 10, Ward Burton will cause a caution by pitting his car. For whatever reason, the predetermined angle that the AI drives out of their pit boxes causes a caution to come out more often than not at Bristol. Since Ward Burton is the first pit box on the pit lane, he is the one that causes this caution, but I have seen the first pit box on the backstretch pit lane cause this caution too in the past. Since I had pit 4 laps after the green, I had 4 extra laps to wait out the Ward Burton caution. Basically, despite everything on screen saying I wasn't, I was set up perfectly for a good finish. This might have been a 10, this was somehow not a 10, and the pit cycle began on lap 10. I tried to stay off the bottom to give pitters room. This was a 30, and by lap 13 most of the field had hit pit road, yet Ward Burton had not. The other Burton and Hermes Sadler nearly wrecked right in front of me, and I had to take evasive maneuvers. Luckily I didn't die, but the madness wasn't over yet. Right in front of me, Jimmy Johnson acted as a total scrub and ran directly into Robbie Gordon. This caused a caution and the cutscene triggered immediately. Before I could even digest what had happened in front of me, I was watching caution replays. I of course took this opportunity to pit, and just like that, virtually the entire field was a lap down. Not only that, but I was restarting all the way up in 5th, the wind right out in my windshield. I assumed everyone in front of the 48 had not pit and were going to run out of fuel. You see, for some reason, with less than 20 laps to go in a race in Thunder 2004, the AI make outright awful pit strategy decisions, often staying on the track when they obviously cannot go the distance to the end, only to pit immediately after the green or outright running out of fuel on the track. On the green, Jimmy got past his teammate and I knew I was in for a struggle to get by for virtual P1. Gordon was a good teammate up until he wasn't and got under Jimmy for 4th. I took this opportunity to roll past the both of them on lap 18 and just like that, I was in what would eventually become the lead. My suspicions were proven correct a few laps later when everyone in front of me pitted, and just like that, I was in the lead for the first time in the race. Jimmy wasn't going to give it to me though, as Gordon steamrolled past me and the 48 was right on my bumper with 3 to go. I wasn't having any of it and began parking the bus on the bottom line right in front of him. People were driving around us on the outside, but it didn't matter. We were the only 2 cars on the lead lap. On the white, Johnson looked to the outside and got pinned up high by Kenseth. It may as well have been over at that point, as I came off turn 4 and won for the second time in 2003. Sterling Marlin came in 3rd and I skipped the celebration cutscene. Multiple people were slightly mad at me, but that's just Bristol, baby. I even managed to maximize points with the most laps led in the event. Brett Bodine finished in 7th, and just like that, I was back in the points lead by 14 over Harvick. It wasn't perfect. In fact, I was hoping to be 200 points ahead by this point in the season, but it was still a good start to the year. Race 7 of 2003 comes to us from Texas, probably one of the easiest tracks in the game, but a difficult place to qualify at. This is the setup that I used, and I promptly ate my words in qualifying. Finally, I was able to reach my dreams of losing another pole to Ryan Newman and lining up alongside him in 2nd. On the green, I dropped back to 3rd and tried to make a friend in Mark Martin. This 10 basically undid all that work, and I failed to lead lap 4. I did manage to lead lap 5 and was still side by side for the lead on lap 6. Fun fact, Texas Motor Speedway was just as bad in 2003 as it is today. Mark was on my bottom on the lap I wanted to pit, so I gave up a ton of time on entry and took a big risk by taking out a half round of wedge. Now would have been a terrible time for the pit crew to have a bad stop. The pit crew had a bad stop and I came back onto the track outside the top 10. This was a 10 and I blew past Newman like he was standing still on lap 11. The car was fast and I knew I had the pace to win. I tried the same move on Mark for lap 12, but the car was done cooperating and completely ate shit. This was a 30. All of my positive momentum was gone, and so was the win. On the end of lap 14, I was finally closing back in on the leaders. It was the 8, 88, and 188 cars out in front for the win at Texas. I tried the exact same thing I tried on Mark out on Jarrett with 2 to go, and was met with the exact same result. It was going to take a miracle to make up the half-second gap on Earnhardt for the win, but I knew within my heart that it had been done before at this track, so it could be done again. I finally took turns 1 and 2 like a competent person, but the gap was too large. I drove as far into turn 3 as I could and failed to get alongside the 8, and I finished in 2nd for the second time in 2003. It was not ideal, but it was still positive points on Harvick. He finished in 6th, so I already knew our championship battle would be legendary. Unfortunately for Harvick, he would never get this high in points again. My new challenger was Dale Jr., who was now 33 points back in 2nd. I had a solid 5.7 average finish and was reasonably happy given the circumstances. Race 8 of 2003 comes to us from Talladega. I didn't bother qualifying because there's just no point, and got the benefit of a huge checkup at the end of lap 1. I don't know why I paused the game here, and I was 18th by the end of the second lap. Everything was smooth sailing. I pit on lap 4 and took only right side tires, and the pit crew finally managed to have a singular good pit stop. This gave me the lead by a considerable margin, and I was easily out front. The problem with Talladega is that Dale Jr. is always leading here, so every second I wasn't out front, I was losing points. Fun fact, getting to this much of a lead at Talladega is unrealistic. I did not get to P1 all the way until lap 7. Stunningly, Dale Jr. had led every lap up to this point. But I was still in the driver's seat, and I was so far out ahead of the field, no one even challenged me for the top spot until turn 4 on lap 8. It was Stewart and Gordon behind me, and I only needed to stay out front for one more lap. On the white flag, I got loose, blocking Gordon on the bottom, allowing Stewart to drive alongside me like nothing. I tried pinching him, but he wasn't slowing down. I wasn't going down this easily though, so I sideswiped him for a 10, which slowed him up enough to hang on to the lead. In turn 3, Gordon tried it on the outside, but I cut it off just early enough to swing back down low and stop a second attack from Stewart. It was one of my most impressive plate track wins, and I was going to try and wreck myself at the line in celebration, but then I remembered I'm not allowed to repair my equipment, so I cut it off at the last second and took my third win in 2003. It was a great run and exactly what I needed in points. This finish gave me a whopping 48 points over second place Dale Jr. I even had the most laps led on the season. My new shop edition had also come through at this time, meaning I could finally replace some more useless pit crew members. Race 9 of 2003 comes to us from Martinsville. This is another track I cannot qualify at to save my life. I put in the setup and managed to grab 27th. A rare Kurt Busch pole greeted me in this race, and I got to work gaining rivals. This was a 10, but this was not a 10. I was making great time and was working on 9th on lap 4. This proved to be way too much for the car to handle. As Jimmy Jones had gone my way, in turn 3, I spun, with Jerry Nadu and Matt Kenseth driving into me and blaming me for it. That was 2 Logo 60 rivals in one corner, and the rest of this race just got that much more difficult. I'd already learned from Darlington that pitting here was a death sentence, and it would only result in me getting a worse finish than if I just stayed out. So, I just stayed out. On the green, I immediately took evasive actions from the rivals and got a third one in the first turn. I did get past Jimmy and did everything in my power to stay away from Kenseth. It somehow worked, and soon I was working my way to the inside of Wallace for 7th. On lap 11, my fuel tank was almost empty, and it was at that point I realized just how dire the situation really was. We weren't even close to halfway in the race, and yet I was basically out of gas. You see, your car's fuel economy is actually a factor of your car's ratings. Since we have the worst possible car ratings for this entire run, we have the worst fuel economy I could possibly have. This resulted in me running out of gas off turn 2 on lap 12. At this point, I basically accepted that I wasn't going to win the race and limped to pit road for service. I tactically took out a half round of wedge, and the pit crew delivered a decent stop. I still lost spots obviously and cycled out into 7th. Fun fact, Martinsville is the oldest track on the NASCAR schedule. The only thing that's gotten older than this track is the Dale Jr. slide job references. This part of the run was really challenging. Setting up people to pass was very difficult, but when I could get it done clean, it was very satisfying. I really hope that the Tony Raines series gets like this someday, where it's not just me being slow and awful at every single short track, and I actually get to run with people meaningfully. This was a 30, and for 3 to go, I sat solidly in 5th. I cleanly put Jeff Burton into the wall for 4th, and ran into Wallace for a 30 for 3rd. All seemed okay in the world, until the fuel meter reared its ugly face once again. I had no idea what could even be expected of me to make the fuel go the distance at this track. The lead of the race was right there in front of me, and the car ran out of fuel in turn 1 once again. People were driving around me on both sides, and I knew I would never make it to the line like this, so I took to pit road where it automated me at 40 miles per hour, slowly to the line. I watched as all the work I had done in this race was erased, and I crossed the line in 23rd without even a lap led. It was the worst possible thing that could have happened to my championship hopes. I was too pissed to even look at the race results. I left Martinsville 38 points behind Dale Jr. for the points lead. Race 10 of 2003 comes to us from California. I got a new secondary sponsor that wanted me to qualify 20th or better every single race. I qualified last and the points leader started from the pole. On the first lap, I was basically able to flat-foot turns 3 and 4 and it was starting to look a lot like NASCAR 08, just without the awful physics engine. I had moved from last to 24th on the first lap and was in the top 10 by the end of lap 3. This was a 60 and I could not catch the rest of the top 10. I decided that if I couldn't pass them legitimately, I would jump them on pit road and took a huge risk pitting on lap 5. I lost a spot on pit road and eventually cycled out into 8th. Fun fact, the California state animal is the grizzly bear. The car was absolutely goddamn awful on this run. It did not do anything right. I was loose on both ends of the track and had no speed whatsoever. I was back in 11th with 3 to go, but Ricky Rudd no-talented it out of turn 2, giving me a few precious spots. I could not do anything on 2 to go and was already back to 12th with still yet another lap to go and a 60 rival in my mirror. Where have we seen this before? I was fully intending on letting Jarrett go so I wouldn't die, but I somehow accidentally slid right in front of him and managed to hold both him and Kurt Busch off the final corner, and I finished 13th at California. The damage was already done though, and Tony Stewart had just won his 3rd race of the year. You've heard of the Summer of Stewart, right? It sounds like a nice month-long getaway. And it would have been, had this not been a sign of things to come. I was all the way back in 3rd in points, 22 off the new points leader, Tony Stewart. Race 11 of 2003 comes to us from Richmond. This track is notoriously one of the hardest tracks to race during your first season of career mode, but interestingly, one of the easiest to qualify at. Stewart was on the pole yet again, and I needed to change that fact. Amazingly, I did, and I got my first pole in 2003 by 33 thousandths of a second. This was a great opportunity to get some laps led and keep Stewart at bay. On the green, I promptly ate shit off turn 4 and lost the lead. The car was really fast though, and I drove around Stewart like nothing and quickly caught Harvick for the lead. Somehow I led lap 3, and just like that, I was out in front. This of course did not last, and Stewart was out front on lap 5. Dale Jarrett was still a rival, so my crew chief would not shut up about him, even after he got around me and took the lead. The car absolutely fell off a cliff in the second half of the run, and I could barely drive off turn 2 in a straight line. It was more productive to turn the car directly into the wall than to try and drive it normally. I slickly took to pit road on lap 10 and promptly put a half round of wedge into the car. Now would have been a great time for the pit crew to actually have a good stop. They didn't. I lost at least 6 spots on pit road, and Ken Schrader stayed out to lead multiple laps like the Chad he is. Fun fact, if you hang on the inside of a car trying to pit, they will be forced to stay on the track. This will result in them pushing their fuel load as far as possible, and they will pit way later than they reasonably should be able to. Or as we've seen on some occasions, not pit at all. The AI can do this to each other as well. By the time Schrader pit, I was already into the top 5, and would probably be fighting for the lead if it wasn't for my useless pit crew. It eventually came down to Jarrett and Gordon, with me barely visible from 3rd. They were struggling big time in traffic, and I would probably have made it very interesting for the win if it wasn't for my useless pit crew. Casey Mears did everything in his power to hold the leaders up for me, but it just wasn't enough. Thankfully, Jarrett hung on for the win, and I finished in 3rd, finishing ahead of Stewart for the first time since Bristol. Of course, Stewart finished behind me in 4th, meaning I gained basically no points on him. I left Richmond 17 points behind Tony Stewart. I skipped the All-Star race because it literally doesn't matter, and took to the longest race of the season. Race 12 of 2003 comes to us from Charlotte. This was my setup. I actually got a decent starting spot and set to work for the 20-lap race. Charlotte is another track which is basically a conveyor belt on rookie difficulty. Just hang on to the guy on the bottom lane and hope the guy on the top doesn't just come down right in front of you. I was making great time and was already 8th on lap 3 and 6th on lap 4. I was passing guys left and only left. I got up to the leader on lap 9, and just like that, I was out in front. I was worried about fuel mileage since this race was so long, but apparently that was only going to be an issue at Martinsville, and I nearly lost 2 spots coming down pit road on lap 10. Despite driving to the lead like nothing, I decided for some inexplicable reason to take a half round of wedge out, and I lost more spots coming off pit road and back onto the track. At the end of the cycle, I was back in 9th. All the hard work I had done earlier was gone. They were not laying over for me like they had earlier in the race, and working through them was much more difficult. Fun fact, Casey Mears won the 2007 Coke 600. I was 4th with 3 to go, and obviously, Stewart was the leader. I found my way past Gordon for 3rd and went absolutely balls to the wall going for the lead in turn 3. I didn't even touch Stewart, and I did not lead lap 19. Into turn 1, Dale Jr. conspired against me for a 10, shooting me into Stewart for another 10. Astoundingly, none of us slowed down, and Stewart drove past me on the backstretch for the win. I couldn't do anything in turn 3, and Stewart came across the line to win, and I finished 2nd for the 3rd time in 2003. Normally, finishing 2nd is a good points day, but not when the points leader is the winner. I left Charlotte 22 points behind Stewart, and to add insult to injury, he had also passed me in the laps champion standings. Stewart's 3 wins and 6.1 average finish was daunting, but there was still a long ways to go in 2003. Race 13 of 2003 comes to us from Dover. Dover is one of my worst tracks in Thunder 2004, and I was not looking forward to this race at all. I did not get the sponsor objective, and the same front row as always brought us to green. This was a 10. I was surprisingly fast early on, driving up into the top 10, but like always I stalled out before I could hit the points leader. I took a huge risk and hit pit road on lap 9, and took an even bigger risk taking out wedge. The pit crew actually had a decent stop, and I was able to easily LePage onto the track. After pit stops, my strategy had worked. I was all the way up to 3rd. The bad news was, of course, Tony Stewart was the leader. Fun fact, the Dover Monster is a fantasy driver in future EA NASCAR games. How he's supposed to fit in the car, I don't know. I was slowly closing in on the top 2 until around 4 laps to go when the car completely fell off a cliff. I was hoping that lap traffic would help me out by maybe holding up the leaders. This, of course, was way too much to ask for, and the slow cars absolutely laid over for the leaders, and meanwhile blocked me off the track. I was more at risk of falling back to 4th than I was to getting up to the leader. With 2 laps to go, the car decided it was done trying for the day, and Gordon finished me off, bringing out the caution. Somehow I kept it going in the right direction and took the caution in 5th. Thankfully, the game wasn't done spitting in my face yet, and the car told me it was almost out of fuel. This was just fantastic all around. On the drop of the green, I managed to hang on to 5th for 1 corner before I ran out of gas on the final lap for the 2nd time in 2003. This was a 30, this was a 30, I finished 9th. Stewart won. He also led the most laps. I left Dover 69 points behind Stewart. That was not nice. Tony Stewart stood with a coy smile on his face on nearly every loading screen, as if he was directly mocking me straight through the TV. Things were not looking so hot. Race 14 of 2003 comes to us from Pocono. This is another track I have bad memories of and have never been really good at. This was my setup and I did not get the sponsor objective. I made even more changes to the setup and fired off from 25th. I was up to 14th at the end of lap 1, working with Busch on the bottom. I was making passes on the outside and seemed like I had a shot at the win. I got a 30 with Kenseth because the tall turn sucks, and I pit on lap 5. I actually gained a ton on pit entry, but made one of the biggest mistakes of the playthrough. I changed the PSI from 25 to 26. You see, for some reason, the tire pressure affects the acceleration and top speed in this game. That doesn't even make any sense, but the problem this caused is that I no longer had an acceleration advantage on the straightaways. In fact, I was suddenly total trash on the straightaways now, and any advantage I had had in the race was gone. It didn't help I was back in 10th after the pit cycle was over. Fun fact. I've run out of fun facts. People were passing me left and right. This was a 30, this was a 60, I hate the tunnel turn, I finished in 10th without a lap led and behind Tony Stewart, who did lead a lap. I was now 3rd in points, 100 back from the leader. It was a never-ending cycle of misery. I even had a shop edition come through, and it didn't even unlock any new pit members. I didn't even bother looking in the screen for another 12 races out of frustration. Race 15 of 2003 comes to us from Michigan, another track I used to suck at a lot, but now I only suck slightly. I actually qualified very well, and the same front row as always brought us to the green. I could carry so much more speed than everyone else in the corners. This was a 10, this was a 30, and I passed Stewart on lap 3. I clearly had race-winning speed, but I did not lead lap 4. I got the lead, but lost it to Newman before pitting. In an effort to not die coming down pit road, I did not slam on the brakes, which meant that I sped on pit road. I was extremely mad and considered taking only 2 tires, but I knew that wasn't a good idea. So the pit crew pulled through with an awful stop, and I sat in the box for a long time. This was a 10, and I came out of the pit cycle back in 14th. The car decided at this point it was done turning, and I began hitting everything in sight. Newman tried the exact same thing the next lap, resulting in a 30. Hermes Sadler blew up right in my line, and I panicked, losing time. On the final lap, I had a run for 5th place, but didn't have enough time, so I hit Stewart and nearly forgot the number 1 rule of stock car racing. I did survive, though, and beat Stewart to the line, finishing 5th and finishing ahead of Stewart for the first time since Richmond. It wasn't a total disaster of a race, but it was definitely one I should have won. I left Michigan 90 points behind Stewart and got ready for the most important race of the season. Race 16 of 2003 comes to us from Infineon. This is by far my best track in the game, and in my arrogance, I did not use a custom setup. Road courses are also an opportunity for different drivers to start up front. They didn't. I nailed the pole on my first attempt for my second pole of 2003. All that mattered was keeping Stewart behind me and surviving turn 1. On the green, I did not keep Stewart behind me, but I did survive turn 1. I was able to get by Stewart for the lead on the all-reliable uphill section, but the car had no intention of turning going into turn 5, and I was back in second. This was probably a 60, and this was a 30. I took the shortcut through the SS and had the lead by a margin. The car was still steadfastly refusing to turn, and I lost the lead in the hairpin to Stewart and got a 10 with Newman. Stewart led the first lap, and basically everything was falling apart. I embarrassed Stewart up the hill into turn 1 and got the lead back. I decided to take the risk and pit on lap 2, still not leading a lap yet in the event. It also took all the willpower in my soul to not take a half round of wedge out of the car here, but I held strong. The pit crew had a decent stop, and somehow I didn't lose a spot. It wasn't until I left pit road automation that I realized why that was. We were under caution. The caution was for Elliott Sadler going slightly slower than everyone else. I realized exactly what this meant. Since Stewart hadn't pit, and I had pit, I was going to restart ahead of Stewart no matter what. Stewart pit and came out all the way back in 17th, and I was restarting in 2nd for some reason. On the restart, Michael Waltrip ran into me and got mad at me for it. I embarrassed Nadu and All Reliable and began working on running. In the hairpin, I made the cleanest pass I'd ever made, and the game agreed and didn't give me a 10. I finally led a lap in this race, but it wasn't over yet. Rudd let me know his displeasure to my clean pass and absolutely sent me. This could have been the end of my season, but somehow, miraculously, the cutscene hit right away and I was only back in 2nd. I was back in the exact same situation I had been in on the previous restart. The difference this time though is I only had 1 lap to get him. I had a much better restart and got around Rudd effortlessly in All Reliable. I took turn 5 the best I had all race long and came out of the hairpin a mile ahead of Rudd and took my 4th win of 2003. It was sure to be a huge points day as Stewart had gotten railed by the pit strategy. He finished 10th. It was without a doubt not my cleanest win at Infineon, but it was a win regardless, and I left race 16 44 points behind Stewart. This was far from ideal as I was hoping to be 200 points ahead by this point in the season, but it clearly wasn't meant to be. This was going to be a tough uphill battle. Race 17 of 2003 comes to us from Daytona. I was trying to pick the perfect gear ratio and kept making things worse because I forgot which adjustment makes the car go faster and instead kept making it go slower. I accidentally started the race without qualifying, restarted the console, and finally qualified outside of the sponsor objective. After the green waved, I was making solid progress before the entire field decided to stop off turn 2. I did not react in time and got a 60 and a destroyed car for my trouble. But the good news was that I was in 5th, in excellent position to get to the lead. I sat by myself for multiple laps before pitting on lap 4. I took 2 tires and emerged with a gigantic lead. With 3 to go, I found myself in a familiar place blocking Gordon. It was at this moment I had a thonk. I thought that since I could hang on to this pack without the draft, I'd be able to hang on to Jeff for the rest of the race and not have to block the entire time. So I let the 24 go. This was easily the biggest mistake of the entire playthrough. Gordon drove past me like nothing and drove off like nothing. I was still left blocking for the rest of the race. I quickly realized exactly what it was I had done. I had just let Jeff Gordon win a race. It was at this point I considered canceling this entire video and retiring from YouTube in shame, but I persevered and crossed the line, finishing 2nd for the 4th time in 2003. There was one glimmer of good news though, as I finally took the points lead back from Stewart by 8. We were matched at a 6.4 average finish, and I was having flashbacks to my NASCAR 07 playthrough. Race 18 of 2003 comes to us from Chicagoland. I actually got the qualifying objective on lap 1, but naturally it was Stewart on the pole. I could drive through the corner a good 10 miles an hour faster than everyone else and was quickly into the top 5. I had a ton of speed and easily had a shot at the win. I pit on lap 6 with possibly my worst pit entry of the entire season, and my pit crew responded with an actually decent stop. You see, even with a mediocre pit crew, if their happiness level is high enough, a lot of the time they will actually perform really well. You're just at a bigger risk of a screw-up cutscene. I actually had to lead off pit road, and once the cycle was over on lap 9, I was in first place by a margin. Dale Jr. was too good though, and he was on my ass on lap 11. I tried to keep Dale at bay, but the other Dale took the opportunity to take the lead away. Now I had the chance to test a theory. I assume I lost the lead because I didn't have the draft. Now that someone was in front of me, I could utilize their draft. It worked pretty well, and I was on Dale's bumper at the white flag. I pulled Dale up as far as I could on the track, but I couldn't carry the speed on the bottom and had to settle for 2nd. I thought I had a chance off turn 4, but Dale pushed me all the way to the wall, and I had to hit mark for a 10 at the last second to keep my spot. I finished 2nd for the 5th time in 2003, but gained a ton on Tony Stewart. It was the halfway point of the season, and I was back in the points lead by 23. The season was half over, and it didn't really help that I had hoped to be 200 points ahead by this point in the year, but it was better than nothing. Race 19 of 2003 comes to us from New Hampshire. I needed to make several setup adjustments before ultimately qualifying in 14th. Don't worry, Stewart was still starting up front. I absolutely murdered everyone into the first turn and was in 4th place by the end of lap 12. The car was extremely loose, so I could barely turn it on either side of the track. I had to take advantage of the car downshifting on both ends of the track in order to compete. On lap 3, I swept past Harvick to get into 2nd. What I had intended to do was push Stewart up the track and let Harvick slide behind me into 2nd. That is not what happened. Amazingly, this was only a 30, and Harvick took the lead. I wasn't complaining though, as Stewart and I spent several laps trying to work back to Harvick, and Stewart promptly recovered everything he had lost. Harvick and Gordon ruined me at the beginning of lap 7, so I jumped onto pit road to try and recover. This run was so rough I actually put another half round of wedge into the car. Now would have been a good time for the pit crew to have not sucked. The pit crew sucked. I lost several spots on the stop. I was as far back as 20th place, but I went absolutely balls to the wall for the rest of this event. Putting the wedge into the car didn't really help in any capacity, and I finished the race in 6th place behind Tony Stewart. This event left me only 8 points ahead of Stewart, and it appeared that the end of the summer of Stewart wasn't getting any closer. We were about to head into the worst stretch of tracks and races for me, especially Indianapolis. Race 20 of 2003 comes to us from Pocono. I was ready to rectify the run I should have had earlier in the year, so I promptly qualified in 39th. I made sure to take back the PSI so I could actually accelerate, and this was the same front row as always. When the green flag dropped, I got to work. This was a 10, and I drove so hard into the tunnel turn that the HUD vanished. This was also a 30. I was having flashbacks, and I started working my way through the top 10. It was clear that I had repaired whatever acceleration issues I had had from earlier in the year. This was a 60, and I came down to pit on lap 5. Now would have been a great time for the pit crew to actually do their jobs. The pit crew did not do their job, and I lost 3 spots. Eventually I cycled back out in 8th, and I had a 60 rival in front of me to deal with. Luckily, Stewart was the last to pit, meaning he came onto the track behind me. I was doing everything I could to keep him at bay. I was doing everything in my power to keep Stewart behind me, so of course he drove straight past me on lap 9. I was already mad at this point, but then I died again in a tunnel turn and had no pace. I was so mad that I body slammed Jeff Gordon for a 30, and Bobby Labonte saved my season for a 60. On the final lap, I finally got through the tunnel turn like a competent driver and finished the race in 8th. Don't faint from shock, but Stewart won the race. It was yet another worst-case scenario event where even though I outperformed where I expected to finish, I still lost points in the championship. I left the race 35 points behind Stewart. This was a total disaster, especially as I had hoped to be at least 200 points ahead by this point in the season. I still had a bunch of enemies, and despite having 6 shop editions, I still only had pit crew guys from the first shop edition that I got. I threw up a Hail Mary and got ready for the worst track in the game. Race 21 of 2003 comes to us from Indianapolis. You'll never guess who was on the pole. This was my setup, and I did not get the qualifying objective. When the green waved, I was ready for the misery to begin. Marlon stopped in front of me for a 30, and I was actually making pretty good time. Usually I'm incapable of entering turn 1, but I'm amazing in turn 3. Much like a lot of things that happened in this playthrough, the opposite was true today, and I was making offensive gains in turn 1 and losing it all in turn 3. I shared draft with Dale Jr. to get his logo off the screen and got a 30 with the other Dale. To my complete surprise, Stewart's race was collapsing and he had fallen outside the top 10. I did not expect in a million years to gain points in this event, but it was looking like a distinct possibility. This was a 30 and I hit pit road on lap 4. I lost 3 spots off the pit lane and came out far behind Stewart, who had pit the lap before. I was still very fast, but time was running out. It didn't help that I had hundreds of rivals at this point that would make passing a dangerous task. Bobby Labonte was a great teammate and ruined my run through turn 4 coming to the white. This was not a 10, and just like that, I was back behind Stewart. Just as I had all race, I completely blew turn 3 and had no speed to catch Tony. I wasn't even close enough to hit him, so I finished 6th and once again lost points to Stewart. His mockery continued through the loading screens, and I emerged to find that I was 40 points back in the standings. The summer of Stewart seemed as though it would never end, but a singular, dim, waning, faint twinkle of hope glittered way, way off in the distance. Watkins Glen was next. Road courses will occasionally have random drivers like Steve Park and Jerry Nadeau start on pole and shake things up. I was hoping today would be one of those days. It wasn't. Race 22 of 2003 comes to us from the Glen. I learned from my mistakes in Infineon and actually put in a custom setup. I did not get through the bus stop even once and came to the line to start the race in 17th. When the green flag was displayed, I was very cautious in the first turn and maintained my starting spot. This was a 10 and this was a 10, but this was a 30. Once again, I completely blew the bus stop but maintained my spot. This was a 30. It was clear that the biggest issue I had at this time was the slow cars in front of me, so I made the only move I could think of making. I used Steve Park as a brake in turn 6, 10, whatever, second to last turn, and I hit pit road on lap 1. I foolishly took out a half round of wedge, and Ryan Newman stopped in front of me. My pit crew had one of their best stops of the season, and I still lost spots. Now all I had to do was outdrive Penske, and the win would be mine. I actually took the bus stop properly and finessed my way past Wallace. We jumped everyone who had pit on lap 2, and it was just me versus Newman. I made an extremely risky self-clear in the Esses and took the spot away from the 12th car. I took my newfound track position and promptly threw it in a dumpster by completely blowing the bus stop once again. I was hoping Newman would put up a fight against Stewart for second. He did not. At the beginning of lap 4, I took the lead off turn 2. I had a solid gap over Stewart, but it wasn't over yet. I started the lap off by blowing the Esses, and Stewart was already ready to blow past me on the long straight. I staved it off for a 30, but Stewart wasn't done yet. We went into the bus stop side by side in possibly the riskiest move of the entire playthrough. Somehow we both survived and I was hit with another 10 rival points. I was done caring about the track limits at this point and threw it into the carousel. At this point, the car was done trying to turn and I had to slam on the brakes, but I absolutely refused to lose to Stuart in this event. I body slammed him once again for another 30 and considered pushing him into the random concrete rectangle here, but bailed at the last second. In whatever turn this is, I absolutely parked the bus, keeping the 20 car in line right behind me. It seemed like I had the race won when I drove off into the final corner, but somehow, some way that I don't even understand, Stuart absolutely ruined me in the final corner. I did everything I could to dump him, but the car didn't turn. I longed for the sweet embrace of death as I watched Stuart coast to the win while I finished second for the 6th time in 2003. It was devastating. I had been utterly clowned on by Stuart, and to top it all off, I didn't even lead a lap in the race and lost even more points. Just like that, I was 55 points behind Stuart, and the loading screens mocked me relentlessly. Race 23 of 2003 comes to us from Michigan. I had absolutely no reason to have any optimism for this race, but for some reason I did despite Stuart qualifying in second. I did not qualify better than Stuart and I lost 5 spots on the start. Naturally, Stuart led the first lap, but Gordon got him back fast. I was alongside off turn 4 for the lead on lap 2 and actually led the lap. The same thing happened on lap 3, but this time would be different, as my logo rival Tony Stewart got alongside me. I had no idea how much he hated me and got spooked into turn 1, running right into him and spinning to bring out the caution. This probably shouldn't have been a caution, and this probably shouldn't have been a 10, but I wasn't complaining given the circumstances. I was not leading, but neither was Stewart. This was a good situation. I took the opportunity to pit at this caution, and most of the field did as well. I put Wedge back into the car, and my pit crew took their sweet ass time. I restarted in 27th and was not looking forward to the second half of this race. I was still very fast, and the guys on fresh tires were getting held up by guys who didn't pit. Stewart was about to fall out of the top 20 when he decided I no longer deserved to be alive. I tried using Wallace as a wall of protection, but failed, and Stewart sent me straight into him. This was a 30 and this was a 10, and the caution was out once again. At this point I was getting concerned about my fuel mileage chances, but I had to hold it together to the end. Casey restarted in front of me and I began working my way back up. I was still making up spots by the time 2 to go rolled around and people hit pit road. Some who didn't pit held up the field and suddenly I was 4th with a 100 rival Stewart behind me. Then, it happened. The fuel tank almost empty text flashed onto the screen yet again and my race was in shambles. I just let Stewart go so he didn't kill me on the white, and I ran out of gas on the last lap for the 3rd time in 2003. I did a somewhat decent job of blocking, this might have been a 10, and I finished in 8th place behind Tony Stewart once again. Yet another race I probably should have won ends with me out of fuel and not winning. The summer of Stewart was quickly becoming the autumn of Stewart, and I left Michigan 68 points behind. Race 24 of 2003 comes to us from Bristol. I actually qualified decently, and on the start, Bobby Labonte tried to be a good teammate. This was probably a 10. I was struggling to keep up with Stewart, who made passes effortlessly. This was probably a 30, and suddenly a wild caution appeared. It was Robbie Gordon, who decided to spin for no reason. I had learned my lesson from the first Bristol race and did not pit here. I fired off on the restart horribly and sat 8th for a very long time. But I knew what my ultimate play was. I was ready for Ward Burton to pull his magic and secure another easy win. To top it all off, Stewart was one of the first in the field to pit, meaning I had him right where I wanted him. Laps continued to tick by until I decided I would pit on lap 13. This would come true, but in a way I didn't expect. The car decided it was done trying, and I slid through turns 1 and 2. This probably shouldn't have been a caution, and the cutscene hit immediately as I straightened the car out. I sat and watched the caution replay, dumbfounded in exactly what had just transpired. On pure accident, I had trapped Tony Stewart a lap down, somewhere around 20th place. Soon enough, more cars in front of me began to pit, and it was looking like a carbon copy of the spring Bristol race. Pretty soon, it appeared as though this race would end up with the exact battle for the win everyone came to this video to see. Me versus Terry Labonte. That did not come to pass though, and I eventually finished in third. It would be Bill Elliott of all people winning the Sharpie 500. Stewart recovered all the way to 11th, leaving me 33 points back in the championship following the Bristol race. Race 25 of 2003 comes to us from Darlington. Stunningly, Stewart was not on the pole. Neither was I. On the first lap, the checkup caught me sleeping and I gained a half-destroyed car and a 60 from Hermie Sadler. Casey was having a great race in 17th at the end of lap 1, and I was flying through the field. This was a 10. Stewart still hated me and really wanted to take my life off turn 2, but could not. Bobby Labonte continued being an amazing teammate, and I was 4th at the end of lap 5. I was making quick work of everyone, and even after blowing turn 3, I still got alongside Johnson for 2nd. All that stood between me and the lead was the Looney Tunes 24. I completely blew turn 1 and got a 30 for my trouble, but I had the lead and that's what mattered. Gordon didn't give up though, and despite me leading all the way to lap 9, Gordon still embarrassed me on pit entry and I made the difficult decision to add wedge. My pit crew actually had a good stop, but repairing the damage from the lap 1 checkup dropped me a spot. After the cycle was over, Gordon had a huge lead and I was in 3rd, and the real game began. As the laps rolled on, I wasn't making up much time. That was until an old friend came back in with the assist. Casey held up Mark to give me 2nd, and I gave Casey a 10 as a thank you. I had a whole 4.5 laps to learn how to drive Darlington to get the win. I was on his ass a lap later and had the run off turn 4. This was not a 10, and I led lap 15 by a nose. I cleared him in turn 1, but I wasn't good enough to hold on entry to turn 3. I still had the run off and led lap 16. Gordon was still hanging onto my inside, and I quickly realized I was basically having this universe's Bush versus Craven. It looked like I was going to have a difficult time grabbing the win, but then I saw him. Like a golden stallion, galloping down the countryside. Mike Skinner's Kodak number 4 was dead ahead, and he stopped right in front of Gordon, handing me the lead at the white. I somehow overdrove turn 1, and Gordon was still on my outside. This was a 30 and not at all a clean pass. It was, however, good enough for me to hold on to the lead into turn 3, and I hit the line to finally take my 5th win of 2003. It was also enough to give me 23 points over Tony Stewart. It was my biggest triumph in months, and I was finally back in the points lead. It wasn't by much. In fact, I was hoping to be 200 points ahead by this point in the season, but it was better than when I was 100 points back. Race 26 of 2003 comes to us from Richmond, and just like Michigan, I had a chip on my shoulder and wanted to prove I deserved the win. I followed up the pole from earlier in the year by qualifying 36th, and as always, Stewart led the field to the green. I had made significant changes to the setup and I was no longer wrecking loose at all times. I mauled the field for the first 2 laps and began lap 3 in 17th. I quickly hit a wall and was no longer moving up through the field. Then, on lap 7, I literally hit a wall, and the car was back to its normal cartoonish looseness from before. I hit the wall in the same spot on the next lap, and lightly brushed the wall off turn 4, which completely destroyed the rear of the car. I really wanted to pit on lap 9, but knew I couldn't due to fuel mileage, and I hit the wall in the same spot once again on lap 10. I barely made it to pit road, threw a ton of wedge in the car, and lowered the tire pressure by 5 points. It was the biggest pit road adjustment I had ever made, but it was necessary. The pit crew had an awful stop and took their sweet ass time repairing the damage, and I was back on the track. The 21-second stop was utterly deflating. Between the rash adjustments and the time lost on pit road, it was going to take a miracle to keep the points lead over Stewart. I noticed that the field was getting held up big time by people who hadn't pit yet, and I was making serious gains. Casey was the leader on lap 13, and when the pit cycle was over on lap 15, I was in 11th. It wasn't amazing, but there's one thing I distinctly noticed ahead of me. Tony Stewart was nowhere to be seen. Laps ticked by, and there was nothing I could do but sit in 10th place. When the race was over, it was Rusty Wallace picking up the win with Steve Park in 4th. But the real surprise was hidden in the race stats. Despite leading 6 laps, Tony Stewart finished all the way back in 24th. I have no idea what could have caused this, but the literal miracle I had been asking for while pitting had struck. I gained points on Stewart. I began the final 10-race stretch of the season with 61 points over Tony Stewart. Race 27 of 2003 comes to us from New Hampshire. I spent a very long time trying to make my qualifying setup better. I actually got the sponsor objective, but even more astoundingly, Tony Stewart did not start on the pole. This was a 10, this was a 10, and I effortlessly drove past Stewart on lap 3. It seemed like another race I could easily win. That was, of course, until I got to 4th place and had absolutely nothing for the 3-car tandem in front of me. My infinite IQ strategy for this race was to run until lap 8 before pitting. I didn't want the extra lap on the second run, and I pitched headfirst onto the pit lane on the exit of 4. Before I had time to react, a random caution flew. I knew that if I pit the car, I was going to restart at the back of the field, but I knew that if I didn't pit the car, I would still restart at the back of the field anyway due to having to pit under caution. It was a hard decision, but I eventually chose to abort the stop for the first time this season and went back on the track. The caution was for Rusty Wallace absolutely murdering Mark Martin for no reason, damaging the 6-car significantly. Little did I know that this would only be the beginning of the insanity that would be the final 10 races of 2003. I did in fact pit under this caution. Stewart was on pit lane at this time too, meaning we were both going to be on the same lap. I restarted on lap 9 in 27th place and was quickly gaining spots once again. Fast cars got held up by slow cars and I was making great time. This was until lap 10 when another caution flew. I really didn't want the caution and Stewart was right in front of me, but I was extremely thankful that I pitted as late as I did so I didn't have to worry about fuel. The caution was for debris from the previously murdered Mark Martin. Kyle Petty was the only one to pit on this caution. I restarted at 12th, almost right behind Stewart. Several people pit right after this restart, and Jeremy Mayfield ran out of fuel, not pitting for some reason. This put me into 6th place. I had the leader right in front of me and a good shot of driving him down. This would all change very soon. Mayfield had still not made it to the pit lane, and for some reason was sitting almost stopped in the middle of the track. Matt Kenseth absolutely bulldozed him, but astonishingly, there was no caution from this incident. Stewart, of course, drove right past it all and was right behind me. Coming to 2 to go, I was 1.4 behind the leader. I gave up so much time on entry, but gained all of it back and more on exit on both ends of the track. I was right on Harvick's bumper at the white and got a great launch off turn 2. I don't know why I went to the outside down the backstretch, but I somehow managed to clear heading into turn 3. The car did not turn at all and I got a 30 on Newman, but it didn't matter. I cleared off turn 4 and hit the line to win for the 6th time in 2003. Stewart finished 4th, but I clearly made the statement in this race that I was not going to stand by and let Stewart walk away with his championship. I unlocked Tiburon Speedway for the first time in my entire life, and the team celebrated the win by changing the background image on the main menu. With 9 races to go in 2003, I had an 81-point lead over Stewart. Race 28 of 2003 comes to us from Dover. I took a very long time setting up the car because I forgot how gear ratios worked again, and I did not get my sponsor objective. You'll never guess who got the pole. On the green, I got a 10 on Bill Elliott and was driving around everyone like nothing. Bobby Labonte was once again a fantastic teammate and ruined me on lap 5, giving me a 60 with him and a 30 with Kurt Busch. The cutscene hit really fast for some reason, and I could not justify pitting this early. Now with extra worn tires and single-file traffic, I restarted in 16th. I was still fast and made huge gains on pit entry on lap 10. I took a risk I had absolutely no excuse taking and took out a half round of wedge. The pit crew delivered yet another awful stop and I eventually cycled out into 10th. I also forgot how to drive the car around this time and once again had to rely on lap traffic to save my race. I didn't have any pace at this point and had to settle for 8th. Sterling Marlin of all people was the winner of this one, with Stewart finishing in 3rd. It was not ideal, but I still sucked at Dover, so to get a top 10 was good enough. I left Dover with a 53-point lead over Stewart. Race 29 of 2003 comes to us from Talladega. I can't believe it's not a Tony Stewart pole. I didn't qualify because who cares? Jimmy Johnson was once again a total scrub and checked up almost the entire field, and just like that, I was in 8th. I pit on lap 4, took 2 tires. Bobby Labonte's JGR crew gave him a lightning quick stop that JGR pit crews were known for before Truex joined the team, but I drove back around him quickly and had the lead by a lot. I was leading on the last lap again, and decided to make a strategic move. I knew that Dale Jr. was closing in on the standing sheet, and there was every chance he could spoil Stewart's run in my championship. So I did what I needed to do. I slammed on the brakes coming to the checkered, winning for the 7th time in 2003, and forcing Dale Jr. to finish back in 3rd. It was almost a perfect move, affording me an extra 5 points over Earnhardt. Stewart finishing 7th meant I had an 87-point lead over him heading into the next event. Devastatingly, however, I did not have the lap champion lead anymore. After this race, I took a look in the team menu for the first time in about 12 races, and I noticed that I had new options to sign. They were all 10 points better than my current guys, and I could have cried. I excitedly fired my useless old crew and completely replaced the entire team. JC1424 became my rear tire changer, and I was set for the next race. Race 30 of 2003 comes to us from Kansas. I did not get the qualifying objective and spent way too long trying to get a decent setup. I did not get a decent setup. This is probably my 3rd worst track behind Indianapolis and Dover. I found out exactly why I was dreading running this race on lap 2 when the car decided not to turn, giving me a 60 on Kurt Busch and an additional 30 when he saved my season. At the end of lap 1, I was 19th on ruined tires. The race continued being a miserable experience until lap 5 when the pit cycle began. I had just gotten a 60 on Sterling Marlin when a random caution waved. Ashton Lewis decided he wanted to make this race into a meme, and half the field stayed out under caution. The new pit crew started off their time together the only way one of my pit crews could and gave me a horrendous stop. Jeff Burton was the highest running car on fresh tires, and I restarted in 16th. I still had no pace and struggled to drive in a straight line for the whole run. No one in front of us ever pit, and I survived to finish 15th. Stewart may have won the race, but I wasn't even mad, honestly. Kansas is complete hot garbage, and finishing anywhere other than last may as well have been a win. Stewart, of course, cut the gap all the way down to 20 points after this race, but I was ready for a rematch in the next event. Race 31 of 2003 comes to us from Charlotte. You'll never guess who was on the pole, and I did not get the sponsor objective. This was a 10, this was a 30, I have no idea what this was, and my Kmart emblazoned hood came off to cause a caution on lap 4. This was a 60, and I took the yellow in 16th. I was so pissed about people just stopping in front of me and giving me 60s constantly that I spun out in front of the finish line to take the caution. I couldn't pit and made a single pass by the next lap. This was a 10, and another piece of my car fell off, and yet another caution waved. At this point, I knew that the problem I had wasn't a lack of speed, it was a lack of people not being in front of me to constantly run into. So on this caution, I pit for 4 tires, and on the restart, I hit the line and turned around to cause another caution. The entire field pit on this caution, and left me with the lead. If I was going to win this race, I wanted to earn it. My suspicions were proven, and after Rudd decided to stop in front of everyone, I had a huge lead. The lead shrunk quickly, however, and almost immediately I was caught by Tony Stewart. I didn't care what it took, but I wasn't letting Stewart by, so Ricky Rudd took the opportunity to take the lead. The draft on Rudd was enough to help drive away from 3rd place, and at the white, I was ready to put on a show with him for the win. Then, an old friend reared his ugly face once again. Can I take a moment to say to EA that making your fuel economy this tight by design is stupid? I ran out in turn 3, wasn't close enough to Rudd to hold him back, Jarrett also passed me, and I finished 3rd after running out of gas on the last lap for the 4th time in 2003. Stewart finished 7th, but I did get the most laps led bonus. This was enough to give me the lead by 44 points, heading into the final 5 races of the year. Race 32 of 2003 comes to us from Martinsville. This game sucks. I messed with the setup for a long time, but eventually nailed a perfect lap to take my 3rd pole of the season. And more satisfyingly, took the pole away from Stewart, hopefully allowing me to keep him from leading a lap. Stewart led the first lap, and I settled into 4th place. This didn't last long, however, as Joe Nemechek got slightly loose, which was apparently enough for a full course caution. I couldn't pit and held serve in 4th place. Stewart lost the lead, and for possibly the first time in my life besides the 2015 Goodies Headache Relief Shot 500, I was happy to see Jeff Gordon leading a race. Everyone in front of me pit on lap 11, and the fuel tank thing popped up on lap 12. But as much as I wanted to pit then, I knew I wouldn't be able to make it to the end of the race if I pit that lap. But at the very last second I bailed on the idea, and did not make it to pit road. I had a good long thought about what I had just done on the automated sequence, and my pit crew actually had a decent stop. I had to pause the game and look at the race stats just to see how badly I had ruined this championship fight. I scrolled for a long time, and that's when it finally hit. Tony Stewart was 42nd, a lap down, with absolutely no hope of getting a lap back. It was official. I had completely ruined the championship fight. I took a long time thinking over the situation and gave Hermie Sadler a 10 when I unpaused. I was making up spots like nothing, which was made even easier when people in front of me started pitting. I didn't know whether or not to laugh or cry at the situation when I passed Dale Jarrett for the lead on lap 20. The situation wasn't improved when I inadvertently caused Dale Jarrett to hit the pit barrels, bringing out yet another caution. I was surprised no one else hit him. On the restart, I was being stalked by Jeff Gordon, who also promptly destroyed the pit barrels on the pack stretch. You can't even blame me for this one, okay? This was not ideal in any way, as I knew I was already tight on fuel and there was no way I'd make it to the end. So I did what any man would do. I gave up the lead and came down pit road. I restarted at 21st, Biffle stopped in front of me for a 10, and I saw Casey in front of me, so I attempted to push him to a top 10. He wasn't having any of it, and I eventually finished the race in 12th. But the damage was already done. Stewart finished all the way back in 31st, and I had the points lead by 101 points with only 4 races remaining in the year. It was a painful moment as me and Stewart had been having such a spirited battle all year that made for an amazing story on YouTube. But now that storyline had been ruined, all because I was incapable of driving onto pit road. It was an extremely sad moment. Race 33 of 2003 comes to us from Atlanta. I actually got my sponsor objective, and Johnson was a total scrub once again and held up several cars at the end of lap 1, including Stewart. I led lap 8 and pit the next time by. The pit crew didn't try, and I was back in 10th after the cycle was over. The car wasn't having it for the rest of the race, and Bobby Labonte was once again a great teammate trying to relive the 2000 Atlanta race, but ran directly into me instead for a 10. I finished in 9th and Stewart in 3rd. I still had 74 points on him after the event. Race 34 of 2003 comes to us from Phoenix. I qualified good, and it was the same front row as always. This was a 60, that was a 10, and this was a 30. Nothing interesting happened until pit stops. I pit with Stewart on lap 7, put in some wedge, and the pit crew was slow. I sat for several seconds waiting for Fittipaldi and lost even more time. I drove around Marlin for second on lap 11. Stewart didn't even hate me anymore, which is insane considering how he did for so long. Bobby Labonte once again tried to be a great teammate. Seriously, give this dude an award or something. It looked like Labonte had done enough damage to keep me from winning, but that all changed when the Stallion appeared again. Mike Skinner just parked it in front of Stewart, and I sent it in as far as I could go. This wasn't even a 10, and it gave me a lead for the first time in the race. But it wasn't over yet. Dale Jr. had immaculate speed and drove around me effortlessly on lap 14. Fun fact, hey, you remember those? My aunt went to the 2006 Fall Phoenix race and took a very awkward picture of Mark Martin for me. If I can find that picture, I will put it on the screen now. I did not want to lose this race and got a 10 in turn 3 and a 30 coming to the white. Hermie Sadler was dead ahead and I was hoping to use him as a pick. It didn't happen. But something else that didn't happen was Hermie Sadler moving out of the way for the battle for the win. I got another 10 on Earnhardt, and Sadler still steadfastly refused to move. Yet another 10 moved Earnhardt to 60 rival points. I was ready to put Hermie through a table, and Dale slowed down to run into me on the exit of turn 4. Had he not done this, he probably would have won. Instead, I cleared the 8 off turn 4 and tried to brake check his stupid ass at the line, and won for the 8th time in 2003. It was a thrilling battle for the win that would have been a lot more interesting if I wasn't already half a race ahead of Stewart in points. I left Phoenix with a ton of rivals and 79 points over Tony Stewart. Race 35 of 2003 comes to us from Rockingham. I still can't believe it's not a Stewart pole. I actually got my sponsor objective and was rolling from the drop of the green flag. Hermie Sadler was still slow, this was a 10, this was a 30, and this was a 60. I didn't even remember why Waltrip hated me, and I was into the wall on the exit of turn 4. This was a 10, this might have been 30, and this was definitely a 60. At this point, I had stopped caring about racing cleanly because I had been recording for nearly 10.5 hours straight, and my hands, neck, and back were really starting to hurt, and the AI's feelings were the last thing on my mind. I had worked into the top 5 on lap 8 and brought it down pit road the next time by. I took the hashtag risk of taking out Wedge on the stop, and the pit crew was mediocre as always. The first thing I noticed ahead was Jared and Labonte slow on the track. My fears were quickly confirmed. There was a caution on the track. Kyle Petty was trying to be relevant for the first time since 1996, and I restarted all the way up in 6th place, somehow on the lead lap. It appeared as though Stewart had pit under the caution. I guess the game had thrown in the towel at this point and gave up caring, much like I had approximately 3 hours earlier. Pretty soon everyone in front of me pit and I was once again in the lead, but I wasn't going to sit there and let the game hand me a championship. I decided to even the score and went down pit road on lap 16 to give Stewart a fighting chance. I took 2 tires and came back onto the track in 8th. Immediately another caution flew, and the pile of cars in turn 3 was very concerning. Elliott Sadler attempted to LARP as a snowplow, and Johnny Benson had the lead. Brett Bodine was the only one to pit, and I restarted in 4th place with 2 laps to go, having sad flashbacks with the situation in front of me. Art imitated reality, and I was 3rd coming to the white. I had massive gains in turn 2 and knew I had a chance at the win. I threw my car in as far as it could go, and Harvick pulled a masterful crossover like Moffitt at Iowa in 2018. I immediately remembered the Rockingham race earlier in the year and had found the speed on the exit of 4 to take that race back, and I grabbed my 9th win of 2003. Jeff Green finished 9th, and Stewart finished in 17th. With only 1 race remaining in 2003, I had the biggest point lead I had had all year long at 134. Race 36 of 2003 comes to us from Homestead. Stewart got himself one last pity pole, and I did not get my sponsor objective. I also did not put in a setup for this race to continue trying to give Stewart a fighting chance. I drove through the field like nothing, and on lap 2, I thought about trying to give Casey a win to finish off this series. Casey promptly gave up, and I was on Stewart for 10th by lap 4. The game wasn't done throwing curveballs, and a caution came out right before I hit the line. Robbie Gordon did the same thing he did at Bristol, and I waited to see if anyone else would pit. They didn't, so I didn't. A few cars came down on lap 5, and Stewart headed in on lap 6. I decided to join him, when suddenly, I was dead. You see, the AI are supposed to smoothly slow down to the pit road speed, so exactly this doesn't happen. Unfortunately, Homestead is the only track where they don't do this, and when Stewart hit the line, he magically slowed down about 20 miles an hour, leading me to run directly into it, and DNF for the first time in 2003. I sat at the replay screen for a long time, absolutely flabbergasted by the entire situation. I realized that if Stewart won the race with the most laps led, he was probably going to be the champion. All I could do was press the X button and hope. Yes, I was indeed the champion. The champion cutscene played out, and I watched the entire thing in full for the first time since the Daytona 500. It had happened. I had won the championship in NASCAR Thunder 2004 without upgrading or repairing my car. It was legendary. The only thing that could have possibly been more legendary was Mark Martin doing what he should have done in 2004, and he had won the Ford 400. I had won the championship by 110 points over Tony Stewart and 152 points over Dale Jr., with 3 poles, 9 wins, 20 top 5s, 29 top 10s, a 21.0 average start, and a 6.9 average finish. It was, in fact,
Nice.
Stewart's 10 poles, 7 wins, and 8.0 average finish was not enough to win the Drivers' Championship, but it was enough to win the Laps Led Championship. Kevin Grubb finished last in points, Only Jimmy Johnson hated me, and Casey Mears beat Christian Fittipaldi in rookie points. But Fittipaldi did get one top 10 at Watkins Glen. I stopped making shop editions at 7, and all of my parts were 50 across the board after the season came to an end. It took way longer than I expected it to, but I managed to win the championship without upgrading or repairing the car once. This was a frustrating playthrough, and there were a lot of times I could have made up some points, but in the end I was easily able to get the championship. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I was hoping to make this the first big video of 2022, and yeah, as you can see, it stretched out for a very long time, but that's how most NASCAR season-long videos to go. I considered doing this on 12 race seasons, but thought that was probably a little too easy. And I'm sorry that basically all of my scripted videos are just like 2-hour-long epics at this point, but you know, that's just the kind of thing that happens when you're putting way too much effort into things like this. Like I said, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and maybe I can try something similar in a different game someday. Yeah, so this is the end of the video. This little closing part was scripted out until now. Thanks to MITTEN Squad for doing these challenges in Skyrim and Fallout, so that, you know, I have like a, you know, basis to go off of for the script. You know, I hope I didn't make it too obvious that this was a carbon copy of his videos and whatnot. Thanks for watching again. This was way more work than it needed to be. In any case, this is the outro. Thanks for watching. Bye.
No.